Hey guys, hope everyone is doing well today. So in this video, I want to give you guys my top 5 investing Pokemon categories. And these are categories of cards that I believe are actually investable within the Pokemon hobby. And what I mean by investable is that I see that there's a likely chance or a good chance that these cards will go up in value over time, as long as the Pokemon hobby stays relevant and popular. Or at least the cards are very likely to retain their value or retain a significant portion of their value. Or I think that they have maybe quite a bit of upside for some of maybe the riskier cards or riskier categories I'm going to talk about within this video. And so I'm going to, hold up a few cards as we talk, just to give you examples of the different categories that I think are the most investable. So the first category, I want to talk about with you guys is trophy cards. The first two categories I think are probably the most obvious ones. I would hope for most people who are interested in investing in Pokemon. So we've got your Tropical Wind, the most expensive trophy card I pulled out, your Art Academy cards. What I consider a trophy, is anything that is won, whether that's in an art competition or a playing the game competition or a video game competition. You also have maybe lesser known trophy cards. If people have seen these, the Poke Creator cards, from the WB competition when we were kids. A card that has a lot more copies than the Art Academy, much more copies, and so has quite a bit of a lower price point. But not a lot of those cards have really survived in high grade over the years, and they can be quite difficult to grade. And you do see those sealed packs coming up on eBay, but you don't see that many. So that's a card that I consider a trophy card and a card that is still very affordable and yet is a trophy card. And so the reason I wanted to show you those different levels is that, and there are a lot of trophy cards too that are fairly affordable and you can buy in the hundreds. Not all of them are in the thousands or in the hundreds of thousands for your, high-end Pikachu Illustrator and, the original Pikachu trophy cards, those sorts of things. So just briefly, and I think that this is fairly common sense, but what makes trophy cards so resistant, we could say, to potential retraces in the future, and why, when you look at other hobbies, what tends to be the most expensive cards or the most expensive comic books or whatever it is, it tends to be the rarest item. And so the benefit of trophy cards is that we generally have a better sense of how many there actually are, which for any investor is a good thing to actually have that data instead of a guessing game about how much there are actually of this card in the world. So that's a good thing to have. There are extra copies of trophy cards, but we hope not too many extra copies, and that seems like less of a risk than the idea that there could be quite a bit more. Any Wizards of the Coast and certainly any of your middle generation, set cards and booster boxes and these sorts of things are a lot more out there than, those types of things that are going to continue to come on the market. Then we're going to see a lot more of these trophy cards being graded over time. So that's the benefit of them. The downside of them are and the reason before I say that, I guess the reason that's important is because, demand and popularity can really change over time in any sort of collectible category, but your rarity and scarcity, scarcity can change a little bit because when the market comes down, more people tend to put their product out there, but rarity doesn't change. So these cards will always be rare. There are only always going to be a few of them in the world, and that isn't going to change. And so that helps you kind of weather the storm through some of those more down periods. The other thing to add to that is wealthier people tend to own the trophy cards because they're more expensive, and wealthier people tend not to really need to sell. And because of that, they're going to be able to weather those sort of down periods if they're sort of macro level down periods, where some of the parts of the market where there's much more of an ease of entry in terms of price point, you're going to see a lot more of those cards come back on the market if the hobby gets a lot less hot and people want to pull their money out in a hurry and try and recoup as much value as they can from their cards if they feel like they're going down in value. So the negatives of trophy cards is the potential that they're potentially niche, that they may not hold the same level of nostalgia or connection for people because people didn't have these cards, they didn't grow up with these cards, they don't think of them, the people who are just getting back into the hobby are not jumping generally to those trophy cards. They want to collect the cards that they had when they're a kid. The good news and sort of the counter argument to that is that the trophy cards have, Pikachu on it. They have the Pokemon on it. Particularly the trophy cards that actually have Pokemon and have the Pokemon that we all love and grew up with. You have that connection to them because of that. And then added the sort of like historic elements of the cards, the coolness of that these cards are won in competitions. Like there's a lot of positive stuff going for them. Despite the fact that they weren't actually collected and opened from packs and don't have that direct nostalgic connection that, maybe a base set, card would have to people. So those are some of the positives and negatives. Overall, a really, if you can afford it, probably the category of card that I would say that I feel best about, over the long run, that I would feel the safest and most comfortable and content with putting my money in those cards, particularly cards that I feel like are undervalued within that category and are very, very rare and scarce, and yet they don't have the price point that necessarily reflect their rarity and scarcity. So that would be my general advice on those. And those are cards I'm always looking to buy, and I'm a big fan of them. The next category that I'm gonna talk about is any like Wizards of the Coast first edition holos in high grades. Okay, so again, fairly common sense category. And I'm gonna add sort of like E-series holos as well. Pretty good, pretty safe. I don't think quite as safe, even though I have a ton of them, to be honest, because I really like the art and enjoy it. Not quite as safe as I think the WOTC first edition holos in high grades because of the connection that people I think more have to those WOTC holos. And I'm gonna also add the gold stars to that because the gold stars just kind of hit everything in terms of shiny Pokemon, very difficult to grade, very difficult pull rate, and just very rare, to find those packs and to find that sealed product. And so there just aren't that many of them, and they're very popular. So any of those cards, good investments, good investment vehicles, I think, generally are going to follow the hobby, but are particularly the ones with the lower populations. Again, going back to that same logic in the trophy cards, those cards are going to be less likely to retrace when prices retrace because there aren't that many of them. There aren't going to be a ton of them coming up on the market. There aren't going to be a ton of people, undercutting each other for those cards, particularly cards that only have, 20, 21 in PSA 10. It's just unlikely to see that. So, I think people know these, but I, pulled out a couple. We have our Charizards, our Shadowless and first edition Charizards, unlimited. Charizard's always good. Particularly when you're buying sort of the main Pokemon. The things to look for, I would say, in that category, buy it for those who don't know, buy the most popular Pokemon. Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, Alakazam, Gyarados, Mewtwo, Mew for Expedition, and then, in your second generation, the starters for that, and, Lugia, Ho, those are, probably your main ones, Tyranitar. So really understanding, for those of you who are newer, kind of like what are the most popular Pokemon, why are they the most popular, also the EV evolutions, Espeon, Umbreon. All right, So, the downside for that category is, one, I think there's been a huge, just speaking about buying right now, there's been a lot of movement in that area. I think that those cards have been, were extremely undervalued and underpriced before all this price spike, and I think that the new prices, and the fact that those have really moved more than anything in the hobby, overall, there's I'm certain there are probably individual trophy cards that might have moved more, individual cards from various areas of the hobby that move similarly or as much as some of those cards that went up 10, 15, 8 to 15 times in value, these insane values for the PSA 10 first editions, for example, of some of those WOTC holos. And so I guess the downside is there's been a lot of movement, I think, in those cards. And they are set cards. They are cards that the pop reports are going to continue to go up in them, particularly when we're talking about like PSA 9s, PSA 8s, PSA 7s, particularly for sets like Team Rocket, for sets like Fossil, and Jungle and the Gyms to a little bit lesser of an extent, but still those. The Neo sets are also, the pops are going up, not as much, not as fast. And then you really need to know sort of what are the difficult cards to grade, what are the easy cards to grade when you're investing, because there's really a big difference. Like some of the cards in Wizards of the Coast are quite a bit undervalued compared to other cards, and some of them the prices don't make a lot of sense to me given the popularity of Pokemon and the pop reports of those cards. So there's a lot of stuff that is kind of moving a bit all over the place right now. And so doing your research is the most important thing to understand all of that when you're making individual purchases within that collecting category. But overall, that collecting category is really good, and I think is going to do really well. A couple things to add to that and to mention quickly before we move on to the next category is Unlimited and Japanese. And so I think that Unlimited and Japanese, talking first about Japanese, it has that negative of having that for the Wizards of the Coast holos, for example, other than base set, which is different, but you get a holo in every pack, and so there are going to be a lot more of those. It's much easier to get those. You have 60 packs per box of the Japanese and the Japanese booster boxes. So, and it's much easier to grade. So that makes it so that the Japanese holos, even if people start to really recognize that the Japanese was sort of the original and want those more original cards, even more, let's say, than the English cards, which, is probably a bit hard to believe that people are going to want those over the cards they had as a kid. But I think some people definitely do, and I really appreciate both. Even if it becomes equally as sort of collectible or the demand becomes as high, you have easier grading and you have, probably quite a bit more of those in existence and in good condition, in gem mint condition. So that's something to think about there. Why the English really is going to retain its value better, I think, over time, is more likely to retain its value better, unless it suddenly there's a huge shift to demand for Japanese over English, which would be interesting. And anything is possible. Unlimited, I think, is really interesting right now. I think I have a bit of a personal bias against Unlimited because I just like the first edition because I just never had that first edition as a child, and so getting that is extra exciting. But I do think that, Unlimited has the same beautiful art, and I still have that definite connection and emotional relationship to the Unlimited. And Unlimited, in many cases, have really low pop reports. A lot of that is due to the fact that they weren't very valuable, and so people didn't grade those Unlimited holos. But if you actually look at the numbers, and I've been looking at them more carefully, they're very difficult to grade. In fact, they have lower PSA 10 percentages to 9s graded for a lot of the cards, and that's really interesting. I don't know if that cycle will continue. I think one interesting thing to look at there will be looking at those Unlimited cards versus the PSA 9 Unlimited versus PSA 10 first edition. PSA 10 Unlimited versus PSA 9 first edition, and how those price points work. So I think that there is potential in those Unlimited cards. But again, depending on how many of those first editions cards come out, and depending on how much people value that first edition over the Unlimited, all of those first edition cards need to have, homes and collections to go into. And those really need to rise in price before the unlimited will follow. And of course, we've seen all of that rise, right, from the first edition, right now. But will that always be the case in the future? Or will some of the pop reports get high enough that they're sort of enough to go around for the collectors, and so those unlimited cards don't move up as much or retrace or lose their value? Hard to know. I think if you can get them at really low prices and they're particularly difficult cards to grade, interesting pickups with probably some pretty good upside to them, actually. But I would be careful, and I think they're a bit riskier than the first edition, in my opinion. All right, so the next category I want to talk about with you guys is sealed product. Sealed product is an excellent investment. The reason it's such a good investment is because you can do so much with it. You can break it down. You can sell the packs. People love just the box itself. They love the look of it. They love the wow factor of having that box on a shelf. And so it really can become your PSA 10, PSA 9 first edition Gen Mint cards, or it can become packs, or it can stay as that booster box, entity. And I think that, even if the expected value of the box is really far under the box itself, that can make sense, and the box can still hold its value way over the PSA cards. And so even if there are more and more PSA cards coming out from that box, which there will be over time, and that may drop down the price if the demand doesn't get larger for those cards, for Pokemon, the booster box numbers are always going down, right? Something very common that a lot of people say, and it's true. And so people who just want that sealed product, or want the experience of opening that sealed product, might pay for that. The other huge thing about it is YouTubers. YouTubers, they're businesses, and YouTubers are making a lot of money on opening vintage sealed product, and they need to keep opening it. And there are more and more channels starting up that are going to start opening it too and trying to compete for that. And that is going to gobble up a lot of the sealed product. I'm not sure what's going to happen to those channels in the long run, because I think that the sealed product is either going to get to a point where it's so rare or so expensive that they can't really afford to open it, as much anymore on their channels, because the ad revenue won't be enough, for them. I don't know how sustainable that is as a business model, but I think in terms of investing in booster boxes, it gives you that. I think it's made it a much more attractive investment than it would have been, because I think that a lot of booster boxes seem way overvalued to me, compared to the cards, when you just think of it as when you look more towards just expected value. But this whole YouTube phenomenon and all of the money that's being made on these box breaks, and the gambling element, people love to gamble, and gambling, buying that pack, and that is unweighed, and then having that experience of opening it as an adult, there are a lot of wealthy people who will pay big money for that, and will probably continue to always want to pay big money for that. And so that's just an undeniable fact, about that. I've got some, I have a number of packs, because I just love the art, and for me, like, this is enough. I'm not a huge sealed, and I have some modern boxes, and here's a Japanese box, tag team, here and there that I'm going to open eventually, for my own enjoyment. So I'm not a huge investor in them, because I don't enjoy them that much. I way prefer to have the PSA cards, but they're definitely a really good investment. So the negatives, and I mentioned them a little bit in that, the negatives is I think that some of the sealed product has gotten a little bit out of control compared to the cards inside, and that worries me. And we might see the cards come up in value to start meeting that, but if the cards really don't move very much, I'm not sure if that box is going to be able to maintain that price point, and people are going to continue to be interested in them. Particularly, you see that in some of the middle boxes, which is quite interesting, I think. When we're talking about modern product, I think modern product, you shouldn't invest in modern product at all. Sealed product, I don't think it's investable. I think it's flippable, and I think that it is. And I think if you buy it at like retail price, where right when it's out the gate, and you hold it and you flip it, you're gonna certainly in this climate, you're definitely gonna make money, at least for now. Things may change sometime in the future, but right now you would certainly make money. Every product seems to be going up, particularly the specialty products. And then in the long run, I think if you buy it at retail, it is possible you'll make money. I'm not saying that I don't think you will, but I don't see, I think the value in a lot of this modern product is going to be for the fun of opening it up. And I just think that there's so much of it being printed. And it just reminds me a lot of like other hobbies when like things were just printed into the ground. There were tons and tons of reprints, and the product never got more valuable. Or, in 30, 40 years, it got like a tiny bit more valuable just because there was so much of it. What the counter argument to that would be that the demand we're seeing in Pokemon right now is very small compared to the demand we're going to see in a year. In 6 months to a year. And so the amount of Pokemon product being printed right now is actually a lot less than the amount of Pokemon product they're going to be printing in 6 months to a year. If that is the case, then probably buying modern product right now is could be a good investment, because maybe these boxes are very underprinted compared to what the demand is going to be in the future. But that's very risky. That's a lot of what ifs for me, and I think that those are big question marks, and that's why I don't particularly view it investable. I think it's more of a gamble. It's sort of a bigger gamble in my opinion. But when we talk about the negatives of sort of the Wizards of the Coast, the E series, the original Nintendo EX era boxes, the downside is that difference. I think that some of them have gotten a little bit away from the value of the cards inside. And I think that if we see and I also think that they've become quite speculated on, because I think there are a lot of people who own booster boxes and businesses who own booster boxes who aren't that interested in Pokemon and actually aren't that interested in collecting it, compared to I think more of the PSA cards are probably in collectors' hands, because I think that people have that collector connection. I think that it's just a much you need a lot more knowledge and a lot more skill to invest successfully in PSA cards. And so a lot of your sort of bigger, wealthier people are just going to come in and grab your first edition PSA 10 base cards, but they're also going to grab those really expensive like booster boxes because they're very obvious. And so those are things that when I think an item is heavily speculated on, and pushed up in price a lot for people thinking that they're going to resell it, that's something that does put up slight red flags. But overall, really excellent investment, I think, over time. I think as long as Pokemon does well, those types of things are going to be sort of negligible, just because of there are going to be fewer and fewer of those boxes, and they're just I just think that they're very, very rare products, particularly your Neo boxes, your E-Series boxes, and your Nintendo EX era boxes, and then WOTC, the Wizards of the first edition, base set boxes, just such a home run. Next thing to talk about, next category, the fourth category, I labeled as sort of like specialty modern product, limited edition specialty modern product that comes out, that's really just been coming out of Japan. And I think that these cards are interesting. The next two categories we're going to talk about are sort of like less sort of established. I think like riskier. I don't think I'm not quite as comfortable like calling these like investments, but I do think that I do see some long-term potential upside. Some examples of a card, of one of those is like, these cosplay Pikachu cards. I have some, this other cosplay Pikachu, the chart with Charizard on it, Rayquaza, and Pikachu on that first one. And I have some other of those cards actually at PSA right now, and some of the Screen promos at PSA. And, you know, those are examples too, the Mario Pikachu. So those are some of like the less expensive examples of those cards. The more expensive ones are going to be like the, you know, these special release ones they get from Japan right now that they're giving out at like tournaments, you know, that I guess are, you know, are trophy cards, like the Charizard everyone is talking about right now, that, you know, the VMAX, you know, Rainbow Rare Charizard that first they said they were only going to be 600, and then it turns out they're going to be 1,200. There'll probably be extra copies also. You know, just talking about that card for a second, like that, and really to get to my I think what is the most crucial thing about investing in these, in my opinion, is they need to be very unique, and they need to be really cool and have really cool art. And so I think the home runs are the Scream cards. I think are home runs. There are quite a few of them, you know, and I continue to see some of them, although they're not as out there as they once were. They are getting, you know, gobbled up and disappearing, you know, a lot of the raw ones. You know, those are home runs. The Mario Pikachu are home runs just because they're, you know, the whole Nintendo audience, like it just hits so many collectors. You know, I think the Team Rocket, the special ones from that Team Rocket case, amazing cards. Like, you know, I haven't bought those because they're so expensive, and like I don't really invest heavily in these types of cards. But like those cards are gorgeous. You know, the Giovanni Persian one, you know, those Team Rocket ones. I think those cards are incredible. You know, and that case has become extremely expensive. You know, those things are worth thousands of dollars now in PSA 10 and high grade. The ones that so going back to the point on this and why I think this you know, Charizard is being so overhyped right now is like it's just a normal looking, you know, VMAX Rainbow Rare. Like, and I to me, just as a collector, it doesn't excite me at all. It's a Charizard. Like, the only thing it really has going for it in my mind is that it's a Charizard. And I guess that it's VMAX. You know, I don't know how I feel about the whole Dynamax thing myself as a collector. I'm not like, it's not like, oh my gosh, you know, and maybe down the line it will be something, you know, these are the first Dynamax Pokemon and they continue to do that in the future. You know, it's possible it will develop a collecting identity to it. I have very mixed feelings about it. You know, but I hear people saying that like that card's going to go for $5,000, $6,000 when it comes out right away. And it's like, you know, and it very much might, because like everything in Pokemon's crazy right now. People are spending huge amounts of money on like the Hidden Fates Charizard, which is so much more of those than this card. You know, so that price tag doesn't seem that crazy when, you know, but I think the Hidden Fates price tag is, you know, absolutely insane. You know, as an for people who are buying it as an investment, as a collectible, you know, go for it. But, you know, I'm just giving my honest opinions, and please, you know, feel free to disagree and buy, you know, what you want, and the market isn't necessarily going to agree with everything I say. But, you know, sort of my arguments for that as a collector is, you know, first of all, I think that card, there's a good chance it's going to come out in English. I know people say that it won't, or I hear people talking about that they don't think it will because they wouldn't do that because the other you know, Japanese, you know, modern sort of trophy cards given out in this way, you know, they didn't have English counterparts. But this is the VMAX Rainbow Charizard. I just don't see Pokemon not printing that in English because I just think it's such a moneymaker for them. And so I think when that card very likely comes out in English, it may not, right? But there's a decent chance. You know, that'll really hurt the price of that card because it'll make the art like totally unspecial. And that's what it really had it going for it, you know. And the 1200 rarity is rare, but, you know, the Art Academy cards are 100 in the world, are unique art, are much older, are much harder to find, you know, and, you know, are going to have, they had a much, their release are going to, made a number of them very difficult to find because the person who got all of them didn't want to necessarily sell it or only sell a couple of them and are going to hold the rest. And, you know, they have like the artist's name on them, you know, and to me, like as a collector and someone who just appreciates the art so much, I'm just such a, you know, it's just such a home run for me on so many levels, and it connects to all of those art competitions, you know, that are so much rarer than these types of like trophy cards that are given out to these non-worlds type competitions. There are so many more of those, and they're doing more and more of them, and so there's so much more to compete with. Whereas these art competition cards that are this rare, you have your, Pikachu, your Illustrator card, and then you have your, Snap, that had only 20 in the world. Those cards are insanely rare and amazing for those who don't know them, the Snap Contest ones. And then you have these that are, 100 in the world, as the rarest ones. And you can get these for less, like quite a bit less than that $5,000 Charizard that there are elite, 12 times the amount of in the world. It's brand new. It's probably going to be very easy to grade. And, just because it's Charizard, it just doesn't do it for me. If it had like really cool, unique art, then I think I'd feel differently. But so those are just, a little bit of a rant in the middle of this video. But I think that gives you my general perspective on these as which ones I would go after and which ones I wouldn't. Absolutely go buy that card if you want it and love it. And, all the power to you, just trying to be as helpful as I can be. The next thing the last category that I wanted to talk about in today's video, are cards that I'm going to call like up-and-comer cards from sets where there weren't that many printed. And so these cards, I think, are cards like, or sets that are quite old, or very difficult to grade in tough condition. And so I guess starting from earliest to kind of newest, I think some examples of these like you've got like your Topsun, Prism cards. These are extremely low pops, very difficult to get, It says 1995 on these. I've heard that they're actually from like 96 maybe, but it says 1995 on the card, and that's why PSA put 1995 on the case. I'll probably make a more full video on those at some point. You've got those, you've got your, like, this card, unbelievable art, much, much more common than that first card I showed you, which is very, very difficult to find in PSA 10. There are quite a few of these. This is a common card from the Versus series, but, like, that art is unbelievable, in my view. I think Versus series, again, the prices on these have moved, and so the value isn't there as much as it was before, but that's true for everything across the board. But I think that these are still potentially in the long run, potential up-and-comers or cards that not everyone has sort of gone to yet. And if a ton more people go into them, particularly cards like these Topsun cards, like if these become like the absolute rage, this card could be worth, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. I'm not saying it ever will be, and it certainly isn't worth that now, but like there are only, 15 of these in the world, and I don't see too many more of them out there in the world coming, even if the price goes up a lot more. That's just my personal opinion on them because of how difficult they are to grade, how hard they are to find in centering, how old they are. They're just very difficult to find, and they're often very beat up. And these cards are gorgeous, in my opinion. Really cool art of some of the most iconic Pokemon, full arts, and, are so old and are from before, anything. So I can't say enough about those in terms of my enjoyment of them. And, as soon as I found out about them, I really wanted them. I didn't grab others, but, the Carddass set, the Bandai set, I have lots of cards from all those sets. Really like them. Similar idea to those in terms of difficult to grade. Great art. Those are all the positives. The negatives for those cards before we move on to some of the other ones. Super niche cards and cards that like a lot of people, for very good reason, like they don't necessarily have the money to go after those because they want to put their money to their main goal of like collecting Wizards of the Coast or collecting their childhood cards. And these cards are not only are these cards outside of the sort of English Wizards of the Coast era that they grew up with, but they're not the Versus series, but those Topsun, Carddass, Bandai, they're not even TCG, they're not even the game. They don't even have moves on them. They're before all of that. And so I get that that's outside of what a number of people are going to want to spend their money on in the long run, but I and that's something that I think has always kind of really, really held them back. But I do think that if more people discover them and do have the capital to spend on them, which I think that they will, there's a potential there, certainly, for explosion. So those are the negatives of those. You know, with the Versus series, very high pop, sort of a negative of that one, or the danger of that one in terms of being an investment vehicle over time. You know, some of the other up-and-coming ones that I'm definitely going to cover on this channel, you know, you've got your level X's, which I did do a video on, you know, your primes. And then I think, you know, some of the most potentially, you know, underrated, under-talked about cards are those really cool cards, those shiny secret rare cards from like the plasma sets with like the really cool gold border. You've got the Charizard from that set. Like that card should be much more valuable than the Hidden Fates Charizard, in my opinion. And in the long run, you know, should do much better. You know, the only negative of that would be that, you know, not a lot of people opened that plasma set, so they're not going to have the connection to that than they would to the Hidden Fates. But I don't really buy that argument very much. I think that that's a really overrated argument. I think that that people are very connected to Charizard, and not only do I think that Charizard is a much cooler shiny Charizard with the cool border, it's a much more difficult card to grade from a much more expensive set, and much more difficult set to find, and there are so many less of those. So those cards are really undervalued compared to other cards, I think, in the hobby. There are a lot of really low pops of some of those cards. They're all really hard to grade. They're all really cool looking. So those are good. The shiny cards from the Diamond Pearl era, the reverse shiny cards, really cool cards, underknown. Like the Ponyta one stands out to me as really particularly cool. And then I actually prefer the Japanese versions, because the Japanese versions, I don't love the reverse holo look of those Diamond and Pearl sets, but I really like the way Japanese did it with like little holo patches on it, little holo shapes on it. And so big fan of those. Those are very difficult to grade. And those packs are getting more and more expensive. So I think those could be interesting. And again, you know, much superior in my view, particularly some of those Japanese, just like cooler cards than. And I like Hidden Fates. I'm a fan of Hidden Fates. But when we're comparing it, it's like those are older, more historic, much more difficult to pull. You know, and I think what's holding them back is that they're a bit more underknown. But I think, you know, if shiny Pokemon continue to become a really big thing and you get a lot more shiny collectors, those cards, you know, have some potential, I think. You know, the downside of all of those, you know, these are sets cards. These are still mass-produced cards. These are cards that are not as old, that a lot more people probably do have sitting in good condition in their binders, because historically the prices haven't really been as high for a lot of these cards. And when prices aren't as high, it doesn't give as much incentive for people to grade those. So if you're investing in like level X's, primes, you know, any of those shiny cards I talked about, you know, the Japanese cards, the pre-TCG Japanese cards, now is a really crucial time. As the prices go up a lot, you should be watching those pop reports. And if those pop reports don't continue to go up a lot, you know, you're probably in very good shape. You know, but I assume that they will. But I do think they're all very difficult to grade, and so you're not going to see the 10s in particular go up too much. But the 9s, they're going to probably be a lot of them. All right, so I'm going to end the video there. This was quite a long video, but I do think that it's packed with some very useful information for people. You know, I hope it is really helpful to those. You know, I really started this channel, and I'm making this channel to I think combat and put out as much really kind of like useful, like thoughtful information on a number of the topics as possible to help people navigate what I think is a really difficult, crazy time in the Pokemon card market. So thank you so much for those who kind of made it, you know, through this far. Really appreciate it. You know, as always, really look forward to hearing your comments. You know, love the disagreements. I love when people make really good arguments, you know, against mine, and you know, I learned from you guys too. And that's sort of what it's all about, and what I hope this channel is all about. So thanks again, and I'll have another video for you guys soon. All right, take care.